My name is Jenny. I'm 31 years old. The screen on the cheap flip phone glowed, too bright in the dim light of my old Honda. I was parked across the street from a rundown diner, the kind of place where the coffee is always a little burnt, but no one rushes you out. It felt like the right place to be, a place for endings and beginnings. In my purse, tucked inside a plain white envelope, was a piece of paper that could buy this diner 100 times over. It could buy the whole block. It could buy the whole town. I won $384 million, the biggest lottery jackpot in the history of the state. My hands trembled as I held the phone. It was a stupid little thing I bought for $20 at a gas station. No contacts, no pictures, no history. It was clean. It was the perfect tool for what I had to do, because before I touched a single cent of that money, before I let it change my life, I had to do one last thing. I had to call my family. I had to call them and pretend I was broke. Pretend I was at the end of my rope. I needed to ask for just enough to see what they would do. $50. That was the magic number. Small enough to be easy, but big enough to be an excuse. It was a test. A final, desperate test to see if anyone cared about me. Just me. Not what I could do for them. Not what I could give them. Just Jenny. I scrolled through the contacts I had just punched in, my thumb hovering over the names. Mom, Dad, Sophie, Eli, my family. The people who were supposed to love me no matter what. My breath hitched, a little sob catching in my throat. I already knew, didn't I? I think a part of me had always known, but I needed to hear it. I needed the proof. My eyes were wet, the streetlights outside blurring into long, hazy streaks. I could feel the weight of every dollar in that envelope, and it felt colder and heavier than I ever imagined. It wasn't a ticket to freedom. Not yet. It was a magnifying glass. One I was about to hold over the cracked and broken pieces of my own family. I whispered it to the empty passenger seat, to the fogged-up windshield, to the person I used to be. I won. And it means nothing if I'm still alone. My thumb pressed down on the first name on the list. The phone started to ring, the sound loud and shrill in the quiet car. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and prepared to have my heart broken one last time, because only one person showed up. And it wasn't who you'd think. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, drop a comment, where are you watching from? Before the winning numbers. Before the flip phone, my life was measured in 5-day increments bookended by Sundays. Monday through Friday, I was Jenny, the dental hygienist. I wore scrubs that smelled of antiseptic, and my hands were always dry from washing them 100 times a day. I was good at my job. I was gentle with nervous patients and meticulous with my work. My back ached by the end of the day, a dull, constant throb from leaning over the chair, and my mind was tired from making small talk with strangers while my hands did their precise, repetitive dance. But there was a quiet satisfaction in it. I was competent. I was needed. I earned my own money, paid my own bills. I had a life that was small and orderly and entirely my own. And then there was Sunday. Sunday was family dinner. It was an obligation as fixed and unchangeable as the sunrise. Every Sunday, I would drive the 45 minutes to my parents' house, the house I grew up in, and I would become a different version of myself. Not Jenny, the competent professional. Just Jenny, the daughter, the sister, the one who filled the empty spaces. The Sunday that everything began to truly unravel started like any other. Except for one thing. I had news. Good news. On Friday, my boss, Dr. Miller, had called me into his office. He told me he was promoting me to head hygienist. It wasn't a glamorous title, but it meant a bump in pay, more responsibility, and most importantly, it was recognition. It was proof that my hard work, my reliability, my quiet competence was seen. All week I had held this little piece of good news close, a warm stone in my pocket. I practiced how I would tell them. I imagined their reactions. A smile from my mom, a firm, proud handshake from my dad, maybe even a surprised, "Wow, Jen, that's awesome," from Sophie or Eli. I allowed myself that small, foolish hope. I took extra time getting ready that Sunday. I put on a new blouse, a soft blue that brought out the color of my eyes. I even put on a little makeup. I wanted to look the part of someone with good news. On the drive over, I felt a nervous flutter in my stomach. This time will be different, I told myself. They'll be happy for me. When I walked through the front door, the familiar scene was already in full swing. The smell of roasted chicken hung in the air, thick and comforting. But the emotional atmosphere was anything but. My brother Eli was in the living room, pacing back and forth in front of the fireplace, a laptop tucked under his arm. He was wearing a ridiculously expensive-looking blazer over a t-shirt, his startup uniform. He was in the middle of a passionate monologue about venture capital. My father was sitting on the edge of the sofa, leaning forward, his face a mask of rapt attention. He looked like he was watching the final seconds of the Super Bowl. My mother was perched beside him, nodding at all the right moments, her hands clasped together as if in prayer for her son's inevitable success. "Of course they'll see the vision, Eli," she was saying. "You just have to be patient." My sister, Sophie, was curled up in the armchair, scrolling through her phone, her thumb moving at lightning speed. She was completely absorbed in her own world, but would occasionally look up to offer a breathless, "You're like a genius, Eli." I stood in the doorway for a full 10 seconds before anyone noticed me. "Oh, Jenny, you're here," my mom said, her voice bright but distracted. She didn't get up. "Dinner is almost ready. Can you give me a hand in the kitchen?" The warm stone in my pocket grew a little colder. The role was already assigned. I wasn't a guest to be welcomed. I was staff. "Sure, Mom," I said, forcing a smile. I put my purse down on the small table by the door and walked into the kitchen. I spent the next 20 minutes setting the table, mashing the potatoes, and pouring water into glasses, all while the sound of Eli's voice boomed from the other room. He talked about synergy and scalability and disrupting the paradigm. It was a language designed to sound impressive while saying nothing at all, and my parents were his most devoted audience. Finally, we were all seated at the big oak dining table, the same one where I'd done my homework as a child. My dad said a quick, perfunctory grace, and then immediately turned to Eli. "So, son, tell us about this pitch deck. What's the next step?" For the next half an hour, I listened. I listened as Eli explained his latest brilliant idea, a social media app for cryptocurrency enthusiasts. It was called Crypto Connect. He spoke of it as if it were already a billion-dollar company, not just a few PowerPoint slides on his laptop. He talked about renting a trendy new office space, hiring a team of developers, and the importance of having the right image to attract investors. "Image is everything, Dad," he said, pointing his fork. "You can't build a unicorn from a garage anymore. You need the aesthetic of success from day one." My mother beamed. "He gets that from your side of the family," she said to my father. "Always thinking big." I took a bite of chicken. It was dry. I took a sip of water. I pushed my green beans around my plate. I waited for a pause, a small opening in the conversation where I could place my own small piece of news. It felt silly now, insignificant. My promotion was a tiny little hill next to the mountain of Eli's ambition, but I had to try. It was the principle of it. I existed too. My life was happening too. Finally, Eli took a long drink of water. There was a moment of silence. This was my chance. I cleared my throat, a small nervous sound. "I actually have some good news too," I said. My voice was quieter than I intended. 4 pairs of eyes swiveled to me. The sudden attention was unnerving. It was like a machine that had been running smoothly had suddenly stalled. "I got a promotion at the clinic," I said, trying to inject some enthusiasm into my voice. "They made me head hygienist." "It comes with a raise." An awkward silence fell over the table. It stretched for what felt like an eternity. In that silence, I could hear the clock ticking on the mantelpiece. I could hear Sophie's fork scrape against her plate. I saw my mother's polite, frozen smile click into place. It was the smile she used for neighbors, for people at church she didn't know very well. It was a smile of social obligation. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she said. The 3 words were a perfectly polished wall, smooth and impenetrable. There were no follow-up questions. "No, what does that mean?" Or, "We're so proud of you." Just, "That's nice, dear." An acknowledgement that a sound had been made and now we could move on. And move on she did. Before I could even register the sting, she turned her entire body back towards Eli, her focus snapping back to him like a magnet. "Now, Eli, speaking of money," she said, her voice full of warmth and concern again. "You mentioned you were having a bit of trouble with cash flow for the initial launch." The whiplash was staggering. I felt dizzy. It was as if I had been briefly allowed on stage, only to be shoved back into the wings a moment later. My news wasn't just dismissed. It was used as a clumsy transition back to the only topic that mattered. My dad picked up the thread without missing a beat. He looked at me, and his expression wasn't proud or happy. It was calculating. He was looking at me, but he was seeing a solution to Eli's problem. "Jenny, you've always been the sensible one," he began, and I braced myself. He always started with a compliment when he wanted something. "You're so good with your money. Thrifty." He said the word like it was a quaint, old-fashioned hobby, like collecting stamps. "You know, your brother is on the verge of something huge here. Truly huge. But it takes money to make money. We all need to pitch in and support his vision." He wasn't asking me. He was telling me. The logic was clear. My raise wasn't for me. It wasn't for new tires or a vacation or a down payment. It was for the family fund. And the family fund had one beneficiary. Eli. I looked at my brother. He was leaning back in his chair, a confident, easy smile on his face. He wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't ashamed to have our father begging for money on his behalf. He was entitled. He genuinely believed he deserved it. He looked at me and gave me a little wink, as if we were all in on this together. And Sophie, my sister, finally looked up from her phone. "Yeah, Jen," she said, her voice casual. "You should totally invest. Then when Eli's a billionaire, he can buy you a private jet or something." She giggled and went back to her scrolling. I felt trapped, pinned to my chair by their collective expectation. The air was thick with it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my plate against the wall. I wanted to ask my father why my hard-earned money was more important than my hard-earned success. I wanted to ask my mother if she had even heard what my promotion was called. I wanted to ask Eli if he had ever, for one single day, worried about making rent. But the words wouldn't come. My throat was tight, choked with a lifetime of unspoken resentments. All I could manage was a brittle, fragile smile. The words came out, a reflex born of years of practice. The words of the good daughter, the sensible one, the filler. "Sure," I heard myself say. My voice sounded thin and strange, like it was coming from someone else. Family helps family. The tension at the table vanished instantly. My dad clapped his hands together. "That's the spirit. I knew we could count on you, Jenny." My mom reached over and patted my hand, her touch light and fleeting. "You're a good girl," she said, before turning her beaming smile back to Eli. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. They talked about Eli's future, about the brand he would build, about the life of luxury they would all lead once Crypto Connect took off. I said nothing. I just ate my dry chicken and mashed potatoes, the food tasteless in my mouth. I felt like a ghost at my own family's table. I was there, but I wasn't. My body was present, but my spirit had already left. It was floating somewhere above, looking down at this sad, predictable play, and it was weeping. On the long, dark drive home, I didn't cry. I was too empty for tears. I just gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, and drove. The warm stone of my good news was gone from my pocket. In its place was something cold and heavy and sharp. It was the certainty that I was not a daughter or a sister. I was a resource, and I was being drained dry. The phrase "family helps family" became the new foundation of our relationship. It was a contract I had verbally signed, and they were diligent about enforcing its terms. The Sunday dinner wasn't an isolated incident. It was the opening of the floodgates. My life was no longer my own. It was a support system for theirs. The first withdrawal came less than a week later. My phone rang on a Thursday night. It was Eli. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Hey, Jen. So rent's due tomorrow," he said. His tone was breezy, as if he were commenting on the weather. "I'm a little tied up with meetings. Could you handle it for me?" "It's $900. I was sitting on my couch, looking at my own stack of bills on the coffee table. My car insurance was due. I needed to see a dentist myself. A crown on my back molar was starting to feel loose. $900 was not a small amount of money for me. It was the difference between a comfortable month and a month of eating pasta and counting every penny. "I thought you just needed some help with the startup costs." "Eli," I said, trying to keep my voice even. He sighed. A long, dramatic sound of exasperation. "Jen, this is a startup cost. I need a place to live so I can, work on the business. It's all connected. The investors are just finalizing the paperwork on the seed round. It's a sure thing. I'll pay you back as soon as the wire transfer comes through. Just for this 1 month." The promise of being paid back was a familiar lie, one he had been telling for years about smaller amounts. But this was different. This was rent. A recurring, non-negotiable expense. A part of me, the logical, sensible part, knew this was a terrible idea. It was a precedent. But another part of me, the part that had been trained since childhood to be the fixer, the reliable one, took over. The guilt was already starting to churn in my stomach. What if he was right? What if he was on the verge of something big, and I was the one who held him back because of $900? My parents' disappointment would be unbearable. "Okay, Eli," I said, my voice weak. "Just for 1 month? Awesome. You're the best. Just send it to my landlord's Zelle." He rattled off the information and then hung up before I could say another word. There was no thank you. There was just the click of the phone and the silence that followed. I sat there for a long time, staring at my banking app on my phone. With a few taps, a huge chunk of my paycheck, the money I had earned from my new promotion, was gone. It felt like I had been robbed, but I had handed the thief the key. Of course, it wasn't just for 1 month. The first of the next month arrived, and so did Eli's text. "Rent's due. No question, no excuse about investors. Just a statement. It had become my responsibility. I paid it, and the next month, and the next. I started budgeting for his rent as if it were my own. My dream of saving for a small condo felt further away than ever. It was dissolving, month by month, to pay for his aesthetic of success. Then came Sophie's crisis. It was always a crisis with Sophie. She called me on a Tuesday, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. "Jen, I'm ruined," she wailed. "Completely and utterly ruined." I went through the usual checklist. "Are you hurt? Is anyone in jail? Are you sick?" "No, it's worse," she cried. "It's my credit card. I took a little trip to Miami with some friends, and I guess I kind of lost track of things." I knew all about her trip. Her Instagram had been a week-long highlight reel of rooftop bars, boat parties, and shopping sprees. I had watched her stories from my cramped apartment, eating a bowl of cereal for dinner because I was trying to save money. "How bad is it, Sophie?" I asked, my voice flat. "It's $2,000, she whispered, as if the number itself was a terrible secret. "The bill came today. I can't pay it. Mom and Dad will kill me. They'll take my card away. Jen, you know I need it for emergencies." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream at her that a weekend in Miami was not an emergency, that her irresponsibility was not my problem. But the sound of her crying, the manufactured panic in her voice, it triggered that old instinct. I was the big sister. I was supposed to protect her. "Sophie, you have to be more careful," I said, the words sounding lame even to me. "I know. I will be. I promise," she said, her sobs miraculously subsiding now that a solution was in sight. "If you could just help me this one time, I'll pay you back, I swear. Little by little, every month." I knew she wouldn't, just like I knew Eli's investor money was never coming. But I did it anyway. I transferred the $2,000 from my savings account, the small nest egg I had been so proud of. It was almost completely gone now. The confirmation screen on my phone felt like a punch to the gut. Her text came a minute later. "OMG, you're a lifesaver! I owe you big time, love you." A week later, she posted a photo of a new pair of designer heels she had just bought. The caption was, "Treat yourself." I stared at the picture until my eyes blurred. I hadn't treated myself to anything more than a new toothbrush in months. It wasn't just my siblings. It was my parents, too, with their endless stream of small emergencies. The property taxes were a little higher than they expected. The car needed new brakes. The water heater broke. Each time, the call would come to me. It was never a request. It was an assumption. "Jenny, we're in a bit of a jam," and I would fill in the rest. I became their personal insurance policy, the one they cashed in whenever life became inconvenient. The most painful part was the complete lack of reciprocity. My needs were invisible. One rainy afternoon, my car, my old reliable Honda, wouldn't start. The battery was dead. I was stranded in the parking lot of the grocery store. I tried calling my dad first. "Hey, Dad, my car died. I'm at the Safeway on Elm Street. Could you possibly give me a jump?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, gee, Jen, I'd love to, but I'm on my way to pick up Eli. He has a very important meeting with a potential mentor. I can't be late for that. Why don't you call AA?" He said it so matter-of-factly. Eli's imaginary meeting was a priority. My actual problem was an inconvenience to be outsourced. I hung up, a cold knot forming in my stomach. I called a tow truck and paid for a new battery with money I really couldn't spare. I never told them about it. I knew it wouldn't matter. The ultimate proof of my invisibility came on a Tuesday. I woke up feeling terrible, like my entire body was made of lead. A raging fever had me shivering under 2 blankets, and my throat felt like I had swallowed broken glass. I called in sick to work, something I almost never did. I spent the day in a miserable daze, drifting in and out of a restless sleep, my apartment feeling vast and empty. The coming Sunday was our family's monthly brunch. There was no way I would be well enough to go, and I didn't want to infect anyone. So on Friday, still feeling weak, I sent a text to my mom. "Hey Mom, I'm really sick with the flu. Have a pretty high fever. I don't think I'll be able to make it to brunch on Sunday. Don't want to get anyone else sick. Sorry to miss it." I set my phone down, expecting a reply within a few minutes. A "feel better soon," or a "do you need me to bring you some soup?" A normal human response. Minutes ticked by. An hour passed. Nothing. I started to feel a familiar, sinking feeling. I told myself she was just busy. Late that afternoon, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I reached for it eagerly, a pathetic little flicker of hope in my chest. It was from her. My thumb trembled as I opened the message. "You could have at least told Sophie so she could invite someone interesting." The words didn't register at first. I read them again, and a third time. They were plain and simple. There was no room for misinterpretation. My sickness was not a concern. My well-being was irrelevant. My absence was not a loss to be lamented, but a logistical problem. My seat at the table was just that, a seat. an empty spot that needed to be filled, preferably by someone more entertaining than me. I let the phone fall from my hand onto the comforter. The fever, the sore throat, the body aches, they all disappeared, replaced by an emotional pain so sharp and so cold it took my breath away. It was a clean cut, straight through my heart. That night I couldn't sleep. The fever had broken, but I was wide awake. I got out of bed and walked into the small, dark kitchen. I braced my hands on the edge of the sink and stared down at the linoleum floor. My gaze landed on a crack in one of the tiles, a fine, dark line running from one side to the other. It had been there since I moved in. I always told myself I would fix it, but I never did. Staring at that crack, I felt a profound and terrible sense of recognition. That was me. I was the crack in the floor, the small, overlooked imperfection, the thing you walk over every day without a second thought. I was there to hold everything up, to be the solid, dependable surface, but I was broken, and no one had ever bothered to look down long enough to notice. Tears I didn't know I had left began to stream down my face, silent and hot. They dripped from my chin onto the cracked tile below. I whispered the words into the crushing silence of my apartment, a final, devastating diagnosis of my own life. I'm everyone's backup plan, but I am no one's first thought, and in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I was utterly, completely, and irrevocably alone. In the weeks that followed my mother's text message, a strange sort of calm settled over me. It wasn't peace. It was the quiet of resignation. The emotional nerve that had been constantly zapped by hope and disappointment had finally gone numb. I moved through my days like a ghost in my own life, performing all the required actions but feeling nothing. At work, I was a perfect automaton. Open wide, I'd say, my voice a pleasant, professional monotone. I'd scrape and polish, my hands moving with practiced efficiency while my mind was a million miles away. My patients would chat about their lives, their upcoming weddings, their children's soccer games, their frustrating bosses. I would nod and make the appropriate murmuring sounds. Oh, wow, that's great. But the words were just meaningless noises. They washed over me, leaving no trace. I was an excellent audience because I wasn't really there. At home, the emptiness was even more profound. My small apartment, once my sanctuary, started to feel like a cell. I would eat dinner standing up in the kitchen, usually something out of a can, because the effort of setting a place at my small table felt like a performance for no one. I stopped watching my favorite shows because the characters' dramatic lives felt absurd and distant. Instead, I'd scroll endlessly through my phone, not at social media, but at news articles and weather reports, anything that was impersonal and required no emotional investment. I continued to pay Eli's rent. The text would come on the first of the month, and I would transfer the money without a word. I sent Sophie another $200 for gas money for a road trip with her friends. I paid for my parents' anniversary dinner at a fancy restaurant I couldn't afford for myself because my dad forgot his wallet. The transactions were cold and automatic. I no longer felt the sting of resentment. I felt nothing. It was simply a tax I paid for being related to them. The cost of admission to a club I didn't even want to be a part of anymore. The breaking point didn't come with a bang. There was no shouting match, no dramatic confrontation. It came on a Tuesday evening under the harsh fluorescent lights of a gas station. It had been a particularly grueling day. A child had bitten my finger, an elderly patient had complained that the water was too cold, and I had to stay late to finish up paperwork. I was bone-tired, the kind of exhaustion that sinks deep into your marrow. My gas light was on, blinking its urgent orange eye at me. I pulled into the first station I saw, a generic, sterile place that could have been anywhere in the country. The air smelled of gasoline fumes and hot pavement. I filled the tank, the pump clicking off with a dull thud. I went inside to pay, my movements slow and heavy. The clerk behind the counter was a young man with earbuds in, his head bobbing slightly to a beat I couldn't hear. He barely looked at me as he took my card. As he handed it back, his eyes drifted to a large, garish sign taped to the plexiglass divider. State Lottery, $384 million. Biggest jackpot ever. It screamed in bright red and yellow letters. He gestured towards it with a lazy thumb. Should get one, he mumbled, his voice flat with boredom. Biggest jackpot ever. My first instinct was to say no. Buying a lottery ticket felt like an act of hope, and hope was a feeling I had carefully extinguished. It was a waste of $2, and my budget, thanks to my family, was tighter than ever. But then I looked at the sign again. $384 million. The number was so absurd, so astronomical that it felt like a joke. My life was about scraping by, about covering other people's $900 rents and $2,000 credit card bills. A number like that didn't belong in my world, and in that moment, something inside me, something I thought was long dead, flickered. It wasn't hope. It was something darker. A kind of bitter, cosmic irony. A reckless impulse born of complete and utter despair. What does it even matter? The voice in my head whispered. What's $2 more thrown into the void? A dry, rasping laugh escaped my lips. The clerk looked up, startled. Why not? I said, the words sounding foreign to me. I slid a $5 bill across the counter. Give me a quick pick. I didn't want to choose the numbers myself. I didn't want to infuse the ticket with any false meaning, any lucky numbers or significant dates. That would imply I cared about the outcome. I wanted it to be random, meaningless, a pure, unadulterated act of chance. He printed the ticket and handed it to me. I glanced at the lines of numbers. They meant nothing. I crumpled it slightly in my hand, shoved it deep into a side pocket of my purse amidst old receipts and gum wrappers, and walked out. I forgot about it before I even started my car. 2 nights later, I was at home, going through the motions of getting ready for another pointless day. The television was on in the background, the local news anchor droning on about city council meetings and traffic reports. I was folding laundry, the movements mechanical, when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I glanced at it. It was a news alert. I usually swiped them away, but the headline caught my eye. Winning lottery numbers drawn for record jackpot. A jolt, like a low-grade electric shock, went through me. I stopped folding a towel mid-crease. I remembered the gas station, the bored clerk, the crumpled piece of paper in my purse. It felt ridiculous. A fool's errand. But I put down the towel and walked over to my purse, which was slung over the back of a chair. I had to rummage for a minute, my fingers brushing past my wallet, my keys, a tube of chapstick. Finally, I felt the thin, crinkly paper. I pulled it out and flattened it on the table. On the television, the news anchor's voice had shifted, becoming more animated. And now, the story everyone is talking about, the winning numbers for the record-breaking $384 million state lottery jackpot were drawn just moments ago. Get your tickets ready. The numbers appeared on the screen, encased in brightly colored circles. They were large, bold, and seemed to mock me with their cheerful finality. 21, 33, 45, 54, and the Powerball, 08. I looked down at the slip of paper in my hand. My heart began to beat a little faster, a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. I read the first line of numbers. Not even close. The second line, one number matched. The third, nothing. My shoulders slumped in a strange mixture of disappointment and relief. Of course not. This kind of thing doesn't happen. I was about to toss the ticket into the trash when my eyes fell on the fourth line of numbers. My breath hitched. My entire body went rigid. The first number was 12. I looked at the screen. 12! I looked back at the ticket. The second number was 21 on the screen. The bright yellow ball held the number 21. My hand started to shake. I had to flatten the paper against the table to read the rest. It was there. It was there. It was there. A roaring sound filled my ears, blocking out the television, the hum of the refrigerator, everything. All that was left was the final number, the Powerball. On my ticket, the last number, set off to the side, was 08. On the screen, the red Powerball glowed with the number 08. It was a match. A perfect, complete, undeniable match. I sank into a chair. I couldn't breathe. The room started to spin. This wasn't real. It had to be a dream, a mistake. I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling with the screen, and typed in the state lottery website. The official numbers loaded, stark and clinical in black and white. They were the same, $384,000. I sat there in the dead quiet of my apartment for what might have been an hour. The laundry lay half-folded on the floor. The TV anchor had moved on to the weather forecast. The world outside my window continued on, oblivious. But inside, my own world had shattered. I waited for the explosion of joy. I waited for the urge to scream, to dance, to call someone. It never came. Instead, a profound and hollow ache spread through my chest. The winning ticket lay on the table, a flimsy piece of paper holding an impossible sum of money, and I had never felt more alone. Who would I call? The question echoed in the silent room. If I called my family, the first words out of their mouths would not be "Congratulations, Jenny." They would be, "How much do we get?" My win wouldn't be my own. It would be a solution to all their problems, the ultimate resource for them to exploit. This money wouldn't buy me freedom. It would buy me a stronger, more gilded cage. It would just make me more useful to them. It would not, could not, make them love me. I leaned back in my chair and stared at my water-stained ceiling. The full weight of my isolation crashed down on me. I was the richest woman in the state, and I had no one. No one to share the joy with, no one to celebrate with, no one who would see this as a victory for me. A cold, clear question rose up from the depths of my despair, a question that had been lurking beneath the surface for years. If I disappeared tomorrow, I whispered, my voice cracking in the stillness. If I just vanished, would they even notice until the bills stopped getting paid? In the crushing, absolute silence that followed, I knew the answer. And that was the moment. The quiet, unceremonious moment that the person I used to be, the dutiful daughter, the accommodating sister, the hopeful fool, died. It wasn't a loud break. It was a silent internal snap. The final thread of connection had been severed. And a new Jenny, someone colder, clearer, and dangerously deliberate, began to take her place. The sun rose the next morning, streaming through the cheap blinds of my bedroom window. For a single blissful moment upon waking, everything was normal. Then, my eyes focused on the lottery ticket I had placed on my nightstand. It was still there. It wasn't a dream. A wave of nausea rolled through me. The world outside was the same, but my place in it had been irrevocably altered. I moved through my morning routine on autopilot. I made coffee, the familiar ritual, a flimsy anchor in a sea of chaos. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The same tired eyes looked back at me, the same plain face. I looked nothing like a millionaire. I looked like a woman who was about to break. But the snap had already happened. This was the aftermath. This was the cold, quiet morning of a new reality. I called the clinic and told them I had a family emergency and would be out for a few days. The lie felt like a prophecy. My family was an emergency, a slow-motion disaster I'd been living in for 31 years. My first impulse was to hide the ticket, to pretend it didn't exist, to just go back to my gray, predictable life. But that was the old Jenny. The new Jenny, the one forged in the silence of the night before, knew that was impossible. The money was a reality. It was a force. And if I didn't control it, it would control me. It would be consumed by my family, and I would be consumed along with it. Instead of hiding, I acted. I spent hours online, not looking at mansions or sports cars, but at the websites of the top law firms in the state. I wasn't looking for a financial advisor. I was looking for a shield. I found a firm with a name that sounded like old money and unbreakable vaults. I called and made an appointment for that afternoon. I didn't give my real name. I just said I needed to discuss a sensitive financial matter of the highest urgency. The gravity in my voice must have been convincing, because they gave me a slot at 2 p.m. Walking into the law firm's lobby was like entering another world. The floors were polished marble, the air was cool and smelled faintly of leather and lemon oil, and the silence was deep and expensive. I felt small and out of place in my sensible shoes and department store jacket. A receptionist with perfect hair led me down a long, carpeted hallway to a corner office. The name on the door was Arthur Chen. He was an older man, maybe in his late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes behind a pair of wire-rimmed glasses. His office was lined with books, and a huge window behind his desk offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. He stood up when I entered and shook my hand. His grip was firm and dry. "Please, have a seat," he said, gesturing to a leather chair that was far more comfortable than my entire sofa. "How can I help you?" My heart was pounding. For a moment I couldn't speak. I just reached into my purse, took out the plain white envelope containing the ticket, and slid it across the vast expanse of his mahogany desk. He picked it up, opened it, and examined the ticket. He held it up to the light. He looked at it for a long, silent minute. His expression didn't change. There was no gasp, no exclamation. He simply placed it carefully back on the desk, folded his hands, and looked at me. "I see," he said, his voice perfectly level. "Congratulations. And my condolences." His words surprised me so much that I finally found my voice. "Condolences? Sudden, extreme wealth is more often a curse than a blessing, young lady," he said calmly. "It destroys families. It ruins lives. It attracts predators of every kind. My job is not just to manage the money. It is to protect you from what the money will do to your life." I felt a wave of relief so intense it almost made me cry. He understood. He wasn't looking at me and seeing a dollar sign. He was seeing a person in a dangerous situation. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt seen. "That's why I'm here," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I need to be protected. Mostly from my own family." He nodded slowly. "That is almost always the case." We spent the next 3 hours mapping out a strategy. He explained how we would form an anonymous trust, a legal entity with a generic name that would claim the prize. My name would appear nowhere. He would be the public face. To the world, the winner of the $384 million jackpot would be a faceless trust. I would be a ghost, The word felt right. It felt safe. As he talked about firewalls and legal structures to protect my assets from people, an idea began to form in my mind. It started as a vague, desperate need for answers, and slowly, in the quiet safety of his office, it sharpened into a clear, cold plan. A legal firewall wasn't enough. I needed an emotional one. And to build that, I needed proof. I needed undeniable, irrefutable evidence that what I had always suspected about my family was true. Before we do any of this, I said, interrupting him, before a single dollar is touched, there's something I have to do. A test. Arthur leaned back, steepling his fingers. He listened without judgment as I laid it all out. The years of being taken for granted, the financial drain, the emotional neglect, the feeling of being a utility rather than a person. I'm going to call them, I explained, my voice low but steady. One by one, I'm going to tell them I'm in trouble, that I've lost my wallet and my phone and I'm stranded. I'm going to ask for a very small amount of money, $50, just enough to get a bus ticket home or a cheap meal. What do you hope to achieve with this, Jenny? He asked gently. I need to know, I whispered, the words raw with pain. I need to know who they are when they think I have nothing to give. If they help me, if even one of them shows up for me when they think I'm at my lowest, then maybe there's something left to save. I'll give them anything they want. But if they don't, if they turn me away, then I need to know that too. I need the truth, no matter how ugly it is. So I can finally be free. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze thoughtful. It is a brutal test, he said finally, but I understand the necessity. Be prepared for the answers you receive. I left his office feeling strangely calm. The path ahead was terrifying, but it was a path. For the first time, I was the one in control. My next stop was a dingy prepaid cell phone store in a part of town I'd never been to. The contrast with Arthur's office was jarring. The air here was stale and smelled of burnt coffee. I paid $20 in cash for the cheapest, most basic flip phone they had. It was a flimsy piece of plastic, a relic from another era. It was perfect. I took it back to my car and sat in the driver's seat, the little phone resting in my palm. It felt utterly alien. No history, no photos, no saved messages full of casual cruelty. It was a blank slate, a weapon. With deliberate, precise movements I programmed in 4 numbers, MOMDADELISOPHIE. Each letter I pressed felt like a tiny cut. Each name was a ghost of a relationship I was preparing to kill. The final piece of my plan was the performance. It wasn't enough to just call and ask. I had to be convincing. My voice had to sound frayed, my words desperate. I drove to a deserted parking lot behind a defunct shopping mall. I turned off the engine. In the silence of my car, I rehearsed, Mom, it's me. Something terrible happened, I'd say, trying to make my voice crack. It sounded fake. I tried again, pitching it higher, adding a tremor. I thought about all the times I had felt truly hopeless, truly alone. I channeled the memory of reading my mother's text when I was sick. I thought about the feeling in the pit of my stomach every time I transferred money to Eli. A real sob escaped my lips. Good, that was the sound. I practiced it again and again, refining the story. My wallet was stolen. My real phone was in it. I was 2 hours out of town. I just needed $50 wired to a friend I was with so I could get home. The details had to be just right, plausible enough to be believed, vague enough to avoid complicated questions. This wasn't about revenge. I told myself that over and over. Revenge was a hot, messy emotion. This was cold. This was a science experiment. I was collecting data. I was testing a hypothesis I had spent my entire life formulating, that the love I received from my family was entirely conditional. I would give them one last chance to prove me wrong. If they said yes, I would pay them back 1,000 times over. I would thank them. Maybe, just maybe, we could begin again. But if they said no, if they lectured me, dismissed me, or abandoned me in my feigned moment of need, then I would have my answer. The final, clean, unambiguous answer. And I would finally stop paying for a love that was never real. My thumb hovered over the first contact. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. This was the precipice, the point of no return. One phone call, and everything would be different. I closed my eyes, took one last shuddering breath, and pressed the call button. Here is the conclusion of your story, following the detailed outline and specifications. I sat in my car in the deserted parking lot, the cheap flip phone feeling heavy and cold in my hand. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, distorted shadows across the cracked pavement. This was it, the moment of truth. My stomach was a tight knot of dread and a strange clinical curiosity. I had run the experiment in my head 1,000 times. Now it was time to see the results. I took a deep, shaky breath, let it out slowly, and pressed the first number on my contact list. My mother. The phone rang 3 times, each shrill tone echoing the frantic beat of my own heart. Finally, she picked up. "Hello?" Her voice was clipped, impatient. I could hear the sound of a television in the background. This was the performance of my life. I let a sob catch in my throat, a trick I had practiced until it felt real. "Mom?" I whispered, making my voice sound small and frayed. "Mom, it's Jenny." "Jenny? What's wrong? You sound terrible." There was a flicker of concern, but it was quickly replaced by annoyance. "And why are you calling from this strange number?" I lost my wallet, Mom. My phone was in it, everything. I'm stranded." I let my voice break on the last word. A long, heavy sigh came through the receiver. It was a sound I knew well. It was the sound of my problems being an inconvenience. "Jennifer, really? You're 31 years old. How do you just lose your wallet?" "You need to be more responsible." The lecture was so predictable it was almost comforting. It was the script she always followed. My heart, which had been hammering against my ribs, began to slow to a dull, heavy thud. "I know, Mom, I'm so sorry," I pleaded, sticking to my own script. "I'm a few hours out of town. I was visiting a friend from the clinic. I just need a little help. I need $50 just to get a bus ticket home. My friend here doesn't have any cash, but if you could send it to her account, I can pay you back on Friday, I swear." The silence on the other end of the line was thick with calculation. I could practically hear her mind working, weighing the cost of the $50 against the cost of the drama. "$50? She said, her voice turning hard. "Jenny, do you have any idea the kind of pressure your brother is under right now? He's trying to launch a business. A real business. Your father and I are stretched to the absolute limit trying to support his dream. Every penny counts. And you're calling me about $50 because you were careless?" The mention of Eli was like a punch to the gut, but I had expected it. He was always the excuse. He was always the priority. My emergency was trivial compared to his ambition. "Mom, please," I whispered, a real tear finally escaping and tracing a cold path down my cheek. "I'm scared. I just want to come home." "Don't be so dramatic," she snapped. "You're a grown woman. Figure it out. Call one of your friends. Don't guilt us with your problems. We have enough of our own." Click. The line went dead. She had hung up on me. I stared at the phone in my hand, the screen now dark. She didn't ask if I was safe. She didn't ask where I was. She just hung up. The coldness of it was absolute. It was so much worse than I had imagined. The data was in. The result was clear. I took a moment, wiped my face with the back of my hand and dialed the next number. My brother, Eli. He answered on the second ring, his voice loud and booming like he was in the middle of a party. "Yo, Eli, it's Jenny. Jen! Hey, weird number. What's up?" I repeated the story, my voice now genuinely shaky from the encounter with my mother. I told him about the lost wallet, the phone being stranded. I got to the part about needing $50. A loud laugh erupted from his end of the line. It wasn't a kind laugh. It was mocking, incredulous. $50? Jen, are you serious? He chuckled. You're the one with the steady job, the head hygienist. You make decent money. What did you do, blow it all on dental floss? It's not a joke, Eli, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I'm in trouble. Look, I'm totally tapped out right now, he said, his tone shifting from mockery to annoyance. I'm funding my business, remember? Every dollar is going into Crypto Connect. I'm all in. You can't make small-time problems my issue right now. It's bad for my focus. Ask Sophie. She's always got cash for a shopping spree. She can spot you $50. Don't make this weird. Before I could even respond, he said, Gotta go. Big networking call. Ciao. Click. He was gone. He hadn't just said no. He had belittled me, dismissed my problem as small time, and then passed me off to our sister like I was a telemarketer. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. I felt a wave of dizziness. 2 for 2. My experiment was a resounding success. I took another shaky breath and dialed Sophie. Her voice was a cheerful sing-song. Hello! I could hear music and other people laughing in the background. Sophie, it's me, Jenny. I'm on a different phone. Oh my God, Jen. Hi. I can barely hear you. This pregame party is insane, she shouted over the noise. What's up? I gave her the abbreviated version of the story. My words clipped and hurried. I lost everything, Sophie. I'm stuck. I just need $50 to get a bus ticket home. There was a pause, and I heard her cover the phone, her voice muffled as she said something to someone next to her. Then she was back. Oh, wow, that totally sucks, she giggled. A giggle. I was telling her I was stranded and scared, and she giggled. But like my timing is the worst right now. I literally just bought front row tickets to see the Lumineers. They were a fortune. My bank account is like crying. Priorities, you know? Priorities. Concert tickets were a priority. Her stranded sister was not. Sophie, please, I said, the words catching in my throat. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't an emergency. I know. Hey, have you tried asking Mom and Dad? She said, completely oblivious. Anyway, gotta run. We're about to do shots. Text me when you get home. Mwah. Click. 3 calls. 3 rejections. 3 nails in the coffin of the family I thought I had. I felt numb, hollowed out. There was only 1 call left to make to them. My father. I had saved him for last. A tiny, stupid part of me hoping he might be different. That the dad who taught me how to ride a bike might still be in there somewhere. He answered quietly. Hello? Dad? It's Jenny. I told him the story for the 4th and final time. My voice was flat now, devoid of all emotion. I was just reciting lines. I finished and waited. He was silent for a long time. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. For a wild second, I thought he was considering it. I thought he might actually help. Then he spoke, his voice low and disappointed, like a teacher addressing a failing student. Jennifer, you have a good job. You have a steady income. An emergency like this shouldn't happen. This is a failure to budget properly. You need to have an emergency fund for situations like this. This is a life lesson for you. A life lesson. He wasn't going to help me. He was going to lecture me on financial responsibility while I was, for all he knew, alone and in danger. So, is that a no? I asked, my voice as cold as ice. This is an opportunity for you to learn to stand on your own 2 feet, he said, his voice firm. I'm not going to enable your irresponsibility. Click. He hung up. That was it. The test was complete. The results were unanimous. I set the phone down on the passenger seat. My throat was tight, but I couldn't cry. The pain was too deep for tears. It was a cold, hard certainty that had settled in my bones. I was completely and utterly alone. Then I remembered. There was 1 more number, not part of the official test. A long shot. A name that wasn't on the core list of my immediate family. My cousin Emily. We hadn't been close in years, not since we were kids. She lived 3 hours away, worked as a vet tech, and we only saw each other at the odd holiday or funeral. But I remembered her being kind. With nothing left to lose, my thumb, moving on its own accord, dialed her number. She picked up on the first ring. Hello? Emily? It's your cousin, Jenny. Jen! Wow, hey! What's up? Is everything okay? Her voice was warm, instantly concerned. It was so different from the others that it was jarring. The dam inside me broke. The emotion I had been holding back all evening came pouring out. I started to cry, ugly, heaving sobs. No, I managed to choke out. No, everything is not okay. I told her a shortened, less dramatic version of the story. I just said my car broke down, my wallet was gone, and I was stuck at a motel off the highway 2 hours from home. I didn't even get to the part about asking for money. She cut me off. Okay, stop. Don't worry about it. Her voice was calm, decisive. There was no hesitation, no lecture, no sigh. Text me the address of the motel from that phone. I'll be there tonight. Don't talk to anyone, just lock your door and wait for me. I'm leaving right now. I was so stunned I couldn't speak. Emily, you don't have to do that. It's a 3-hour drive. Jenny, shut up, she said, but her voice was full of kindness. Of course I have to. That's what family does. Now text me the address. I'll see you in a few hours. Click. She hung up. But this time, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with a feeling so foreign I could barely identify it. It was hope. I texted Emily the address of a cheap motel just off the interstate, a place I had passed 100 times but never noticed. It had a flickering neon sign that said motel, with the M and the L burnt out, so it just read OTE. It seemed fitting. I paid for a room in cash, the crisp bills from my secret purse feeling like props in a movie. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and pine-scented cleaner. The bedspread was a faded floral pattern, thin and scratchy to the touch. It was the loneliest place I had ever been. For the next 3 hours, I just sat on the edge of the bed and waited. The calls replayed in my head on a relentless loop. My mother's sigh, Eli's laugh, Sophie's giggle, my father's lecture. Each memory was a fresh cut. I had known, hadn't I? Deep down, I had known they would fail the test. But hearing it, experiencing the 4 neat clinical dismissals one after the other, had shattered something inside me. The last fragile layer of denial had been stripped away, leaving the raw, ugly truth exposed. They did not love me. They loved my utility, and without it, I was nothing to them. I stared at the peeling paint on the wall, feeling a profound and terrifying emptiness. The $384 million was an abstraction. It didn't feel real. This motel room, this crushing loneliness, this felt real. I wondered if Emily would really come. Maybe she'd think about the long drive, the gas money, the late hour, and change her mind. Maybe she'd call back and make an excuse. At that point, I wouldn't have been surprised. I was prepared for it. Just after 11 p.m., a pair of headlights swept across the thin curtains of my window. I peeked out. A beat-up old Subaru was pulling into the parking spot directly in front of my room. The engine cut, and Emily got out. She looked tired from the drive, but her face was etched with worry. In one hand, she was holding a greasy paper bag from a fast food restaurant. In the other, she was clutching a small white envelope. I opened the door before she could knock. We just looked at each other for a second under the buzzing, burnt-out neon sign. Then, her face softened and she rushed forward, pulling me into a hug. It wasn't a polite, air kiss kind of hug. It was a real solid hug, the kind that says, "I'm here. You're safe." I started to cry again, burying my face in her shoulder. She just held me, rubbing my back until the sobs subsided into shaky breaths. "Come on, let's go inside," she said gently, leading me back into the dreary room. She kicked the door shut with her foot. She put the paper bag on the small, round table. "I brought you a burger and some fries," she said, her voice soft. "I figured you probably haven't eaten, right?" The simple question, the basic act of thinking about my needs, was so overwhelming that my eyes filled with tears again. No one had asked me that. No one had considered my hunger, my fear, my physical well-being. They had only considered how my problem affected them. "And this," she said, pushing the small white envelope across the table towards me. "It's all I could pull together from the ATM on my way out of town. It's $120. Is that enough to get you home? If not, I can probably—" "Emily, stop," I whispered, my voice thick. I couldn't bear her kindness. It was too much. She looked at me, her brow furrowed with concern. "What is it, Jen? What's really going on?" "You can tell me," and so I did. In that cheap, lonely motel room, under the dim light of a single flickering lamp, I told her everything. I told her about the years of being the family ATM, about Eli's rent and Sophie's credit card bills. I told her about the Sunday dinner, about my promotion being dismissed. I told her about my mother's text message when I was sick. And then, I told her about the lottery ticket. I watched her face as I spoke, expecting shock, disbelief, maybe even jealousy. But she just listened. Her expression never changed. She didn't flinch. She just sat there, her focus entirely on me, absorbing every painful word. When I finally finished, the story hanging in the stale air between us, she was quiet for a long time. She looked at the fast food bag, then at the envelope with her money in it, then back at me. "Wow," she said softly. It wasn't an exclamation of surprise. It was a breath of empathy. "The call's tonight," I said, my voice barely audible. It was a test. I had to know for sure. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Her hand was warm. "You didn't need to test them, Jen," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. "You already had your answer. You've had it for years. You don't owe anyone proof of their bad behavior. You just owe yourself peace." Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. "You just owe yourself peace." It was such a simple idea, but it was revolutionary to me. My entire life had been about what I owed other people. It had never occurred to me that the primary debt I carried was to myself. We didn't talk much after that. We ate the burgers and fries in a comfortable silence. It was the best meal I had ever tasted. Later, Emily took the single armchair, insisting I take the bed. I fell asleep to the sound of her soft, steady breathing, a human presence in the dark that kept the loneliness at bay. The next morning, I woke up feeling different. The heavy, crushing weight in my chest was still there, but it had shifted. It was no longer the weight of despair. It was the weight of decision. Emily was already awake, sipping a cup of terrible-looking coffee from the in-room machine. "Morning," she said with a small smile. I smiled back. I took a deep breath. "Emily," I began, my voice clear and firm. "Thank you for coming. I don't think I'll ever be able to thank you enough." I reached into my purse, the one with the lottery ticket, and pulled out a checkbook from one of the new accounts Arthur had helped me set up. I wrote her a check for $10,000 and slid it across the table. She stared at it, her eyes wide. "Jenny, what is this?" "I can't take this." "Yes, you can," I said. "It's not a reward. It's not even a thank you. It's an investment. It's the first dollar I'm spending from that ticket, and I want it to go to the only person who showed up when it mattered." I paused. Then I asked the question that had been forming in my mind all morning. "Will you help me? Not with the money, but with what to do with it. Will you help me build something good?" She looked from the check to my face, a slow understanding dawning in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" "I want to start a foundation," I said, the idea feeling more real as I spoke it aloud. A fund for people like me, people who work hard, who help everyone, who are always the responsible one, and who never, ever get helped back. The people who get told to be more responsible when they ask for $50. Emily looked at me, a slow, wide smile spreading across her face. Something boring and honest, she said, as if reading my mind. I nodded, a matching smile on my own face. Exactly. No talk about unicorns or disrupting paradigms. Just helping people. Second chances. The Second Chances Fund, she said, trying the name out. She tapped the check on the table. Okay, Jen, I'm in. Let's make something boring and honest. In that moment, in that dingy motel room, surrounded by the wreckage of my old family, a new one began to form. It wasn't based on blood or obligation. It was based on a shared understanding, on a quiet promise to show up. It was a family of two, but it was more real than anything I had ever known. For 2 weeks, I lived in a strange sort of limbo. I worked with Arthur Chen and a small team of accountants to finalize the legal structures for the trust and the Second Chances Fund. Emily and I spent hours on the phone, brainstorming, talking about what the fund would look like, who it would help, and how. We were building something new, and for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of purpose that was entirely my own. It had nothing to do with my family's needs or expectations. It was mine. During that time, I didn't speak to my family, and they didn't speak to me. My silence wasn't unusual. I was often the one to go quiet after a particularly draining family event. They probably assumed I was sulking. They had no idea that my silence wasn't passive. It was a wall I was actively building, brick by brick. Then the news broke. It was a Tuesday morning. I was at work, cleaning a patient's teeth when my personal cell phone, the one my family had the number for, started buzzing in my pocket. It buzzed again. And again. It was so incessant that the patient in the chair gave me a curious look. Sorry about that, I mumbled, finishing the polishing. During my lunch break, I finally looked at my phone. I had 17 missed calls and over 30 text messages. My blood ran cold. My first thought was that something terrible had happened. An accident. Then I saw the headlines on my news app. Anonymous local claims record. $384 million jackpot. Winner of historic lottery prize chooses. Anonymity through Serenity Trust. My stomach dropped. It was happening. They knew. Or at least they suspected. I opened the text messages. My hands were trembling. The first was from my mother. Jenny, is that you? Please tell me it's you. We saw the news. Call me immediately. The next was from Eli. Jen, the Serenity Trust. Is that us? We can finally launch my brand on a global scale. This is it. The moment we've been waiting for. Call me back. We need to strategize. He used the words us and we. Of course he did. Then came Sophie's. OMG, bestie, is it O? I am literally screaming, Rin. Remember how I always believed in you, Lowell? We should go shopping. Like Paris shopping. Call me back! Coax when finally my father's ever the pragmatist, Jennifer. We need to discuss responsible wealth management. Do not speak to anyone until you speak to me. There will be many people trying to take advantage of you. The hypocrisy was so stunning, it was almost comical. They were worried about other people taking advantage of me. The tidal wave of messages was overwhelming, a desperate, greedy grab for a piece of me they thought they owned. But the most telling part? Not a single one of them mentioned the last time we had spoken. Not a single one said, I'm so sorry I didn't help you when you called. It was as if that night had never happened. My moment of feigned desperation had been so insignificant to them that it had been completely erased by the glare of a 9-figure number. I felt a surge of cold, clear anger. I took a deep breath, put the phone on silent, and placed it face down on the table. I did not reply. I would let my lawyer handle everything. Arthur had prepared for this. He was my firewall. The next 2 days were a siege. They called my work. They left frantic voicemails. They texted constantly. I ignored it all. I felt strangely calm, detached. It was like watching a movie about someone else's life. On Thursday evening, they escalated. As I was leaving my apartment to meet Emily for dinner, I saw my parents' car parked on the street. They were standing by the main entrance to my building, waiting for me. My mother was holding a casserole dish, a classic weapon in her arsenal of passive aggression. My first instinct was to turn and run. But the new Jenny, the one who had sat in that motel room and made a decision, stopped me. I owed myself peace, Emily had said. And peace, I was beginning to realize, wasn't about running away. It was about standing still and holding your ground. I walked towards them, my steps steady. My mother rushed forward, her face a mixture of anxiety and forced cheerfulness. Jenny! Honey, we've been so worried. You haven't been answering your phone. she gushed, shoving the warm casserole dish into my hands. It was her signature lasagna, the one she made when she wanted something, or when she had done something wrong and wanted to pretend she hadn't. "We're family, Jen," my father said, his voice low and serious. He stood slightly behind her, like a general observing a negotiation. "You can't just shut us out like this. We love you," the words hung in the air, hollow and false. I looked from his stern face to my mother's pleading smile. I looked at the casserole dish in my hands. It felt heavy, a bribe. I took a deep breath and looked my mother directly in the eye. My voice, when it came out, was quiet, calm, and utterly devoid of the emotion she was expecting. "You hung up on me," I said. Her smile faltered. "What? What are you talking about?" "Last week," I continued, my gaze unwavering. "When I called you from the side of the road, when I told you I had lost everything and I was scared, when I asked you for $50, you told me not to guilt you with my drama, and you hung up on me." The color drained from her face. She opened her mouth and closed it. She looked at my father for help, but he was staring at me, his expression unreadable. I thought you were testing me," she stammered, the excuse flimsy and pathetic. I thought it was some kind of test. A cold, sad smile touched my lips. The irony was devastating. She was closer to the truth than she knew. "I was," I said softly. My voice was a whisper, but it carried the weight of a final judgment. "And you failed." I gently placed the casserole dish on the ground next to the potted plant by the door. I didn't shove it at her. I didn't drop it, I just let it go. Then, without another word, I turned around, walked back into the lobby of my building, and let the heavy glass door swing shut behind me. I didn't look back to see their faces. I didn't need to. The click of the door locking was the only sound. It was the sound of a chapter ending. It was the sound of closure. There was no shouting, no anger, no final dramatic confrontation. There was just a quiet, clean break. Months passed. The initial frenzy over the lottery winner died down, replaced by other headlines, other dramas. My life, which had been thrown into such chaos, slowly found a new, quiet rhythm. My lawyer, Arthur, handled everything with silent, ruthless efficiency. A new, unlisted phone number, a post office box for my mail. He was the impenetrable wall between my new life and my old one. The most surprising decision I made, to everyone but myself, was that I kept my job. I didn't need to work, of course. I could have spent the rest of my life on a beach, sipping drinks with little umbrellas in them, but the thought of it felt empty. My job at the dental clinic was real. It was a place where I was competent, where I helped people in a small but tangible way. It grounded me. So, 3 days a week, I still put on my scrubs, washed my hands 100 times, and told people to floss more. The difference was that now it was a choice. Every day I went to work was a day I chose to be there. The freedom wasn't in not working. It was in the power to choose. I sold my small, cramped apartment and bought a modest house by a lake about an hour out of the city. It wasn't a mansion. It didn't have a 10-car garage or a home theater. It had big windows that looked out over the water, a small garden where I was attempting to grow tomatoes, and a fireplace that crackled on cool evenings. It was peaceful. It was a home, not a status symbol. My toxic Sunday dinners were replaced by quiet Sunday breakfasts. Emily would drive out, and we'd sit on my back porch with coffee and talk for hours. We were more than cousins now. We were partners. The Second Chances Fund was officially up and running. We had a small board, a clear mission, and our first few anonymous grants had already gone out. Sometimes 1 or 2 of the women we were helping would join us for breakfast. A young single mother who needed help with a down payment on a reliable car. A woman in her 50s who had spent her life caring for her parents and needed funds to go back to school. We never talked about money. We talked about their children, their classes, their hopes. We had formed a new family, one built not on obligation or blood, but on shared experience and mutual support. It was a family where everyone was seen. I learned to find joy in small things. The way the sun glittered on the lake in the morning, the taste of a homegrown tomato, the deep, dreamless sleep that came from a quiet mind. The money was a silent tool in the background. I donated to local charities, always anonymously. I paid for the town library's renovation. I funded a new wing at the local animal shelter. The money was a source of good in the world, but I refused to let it become the source of my identity. My old family still tried to reach me. For the first few months, the letters were a deluge of apologies, accusations, and desperate pleas, all forwarded to me by Arthur's office. My mother wrote about how she had been under so much stress. Eli wrote about the incredible opportunity I was squandering. Sophie sent me a Tiffany bracelet with a note that said, "Family is forever." My father sent a detailed financial plan he had drafted for me. I read them all at first. I felt a flicker of the old pain, the old guilt, but it was fainter now, like a scar that no longer hurt to the touch. I never replied. After a while, the letters became less frequent. Their anger and desperation faded into a kind of resentful silence. I didn't block their numbers from my old phone, which I kept in a drawer. Sometimes, on a day when I felt particularly strong, I would turn it on and see the messages that had piled up. Jenny, please call me. Jen, we miss you. You're tearing this family apart. The words no longer had any power over me. They were just echoes from a life that wasn't mine anymore. They were trying to guilt a person who no longer existed. One evening, I was sitting by the fire, reading a book, when a thought drifted into my mind. I thought about my mother's face in the lobby, the crumbling smile. I thought about Eli's entitled laughter, Sophie's careless giggle, my father's cold lecture. I realized with a sense of profound calm that I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't hate them. I didn't wish them ill. I just felt nothing. They were strangers who shared some of my DNA. The emotional cord had been so cleanly severed that there was nothing left to feel. That, I realized, was the true meaning of closure. Closure isn't revenge. It's not a dramatic confrontation or a final, witty comeback. It's not about making them feel the pain they made you feel. It's silence. But it's a different kind of silence. It's not the lonely, aching silence of my old apartment. It's a quiet, peaceful silence. The silence that doesn't ache anymore. It's the sound of freedom. It's the sound of a wound that has finally, truly healed. I look into the camera now, not from a cramped car or a lonely apartment, but from the quiet comfort of my own home. The sun is setting over the lake behind me, and the world is peaceful. My story had a shocking beginning, a lottery ticket worth a fortune. But the money was never the point. It was just the magnifying glass that showed me the truth. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever been the one who gives and gives until there's nothing left, don't wait for a lottery ticket to show you the truth. You don't need a test. You already have the data. You already know. Don't wait for them to see you. Be your own proof. The real jackpot isn't the money. The real jackpot is finding the person who will drive 3 hours in the middle of the night with their last $100 in an envelope, not because they have to, but because you needed them. If someone ever does that for you, keep them forever. They are the real prize. My name is Jenny, and I am finally, wonderfully, peacefully rich. Like this video if you've ever been the one who always gave. Subscribe if you're ready to stop apologizing for it.